worst cliches in football is that it's a game of inches. But one of my favorite, probably soon to be cliches in fantasy football, is that it's a game of percentages and fractions. That it is, if you have a 51% advantage, that's an advantage. If you have 55% confidence level that something will happen between A or B, and you pick A because it's 55% likely to happen, you have an advantage. It's all the micro level advantages that we're seeking that add up to a championship caliber team. Uh, so I'm always looking for any kind of advantage, even if it's small. And for many years, I've been analyzing, among other things, home field advantage. What does that mean in terms of fantasy? So traditionally, home teams for years, if you looked at it across many, many years, the going percentage of win rate for home teams in the NFL is about 58%, 57% across years and years and years. I noticed that when COVID happened, there was a shift in that, maybe because fewer people attended the games, you lost some of the crowd noise, and the that home field advantage lessened. Um, but I think we're in this post world now where it's, from the data I've seen, we're kind of back on the on ramp of home field advantage being a thing and something that you can actually use to your advantage in fantasy. Yesterday, I posted on the Fantasy Football for Winners blog a piece on touchdowns. And that when we look at the teams with the fewest offensive touchdowns, um, only on average over the last several years, about 1.1 of that team's players have finished in the top 70 overall fantasy producers for that season. So one in the top 70, where the law of averages would suggest you would have at least two and a fraction. Where did the other numbers go? Well, it went to the teams with the most touchdowns. So the teams with the most offensive touchdowns on average had about 3.1, 3.2 players finish in the top 70, often in the top 40. It goes without saying that there's kind of a chicken and egg thing here, because you have teams that score a lot of touchdowns, of course, are going to have more players who benefit from fantasy. I mean, we bet on that in drafts. We understand that intuitively. We know, for example, this year, as I shared in a podcast a few weeks ago, that the Saints offense could be real trouble, and therefore we should probably fade even the most conservative estimates of fantasy outcomes for some of these players like Chris Olave and even Alvin Kamara. So when it comes to offensive prowess, the ability to score, those are individual cases. We're analyzing fantasy players' potential outcomes based on individual team-by-team cases. Are these teams likely to have a lot of red zone opportunities that might lead to scores? Is one example of looking at it. For the time remaining on this episode of this podcast, I want to talk about a different way of looking at this, kind of the macro level. And the macro level is, since 2021, we've had 17-game regular seasons in the NFL, which means that the conferences have alternated having an extra home game. Now, a handful of these home games are counted towards overseas games where one team is designated as the home team. I think it's kind of ridiculous. It makes analyzing data much tougher in terms of home field advantage. But it is what it is. The NFL, I guess, knows what it's doing. But a lot of those games are intra-conference. They're AFC versus AFC or NFC versus NFC. So in some ways, they're kind of a wash, because it's not like AFC versus NFC is getting some skewed numbers that might impact what I'm about to talk about. So from 2021 to 2024, they've alternated 9 games at home for one conference, 8 games at home for the other. What's interesting is, if you take a step back and look at the big picture, you see that in each of those seasons, NFC teams have averaged more points than AFC teams. It's been consistent every year. Whether or not the NFC has more home games or fewer, the NFC has had an advantage. So you might look at that and say, all right, well, home field doesn't really matter in that sense. But then when you look at the actual numbers, you see that the NFC advantage over the AFC in years when they have fewer home games is minuscule. And in the years where they have an extra home game, it's significant. That matters. One example is 2021, when the NFC had an extra home game. The AFC teams averaged 22.2 points per game. The NFC averaged 23.7. That's a 1.5 point differential. That is pretty significant. And though I haven't done it, I imagine if you looked at the top 100 offensive scorers for 2021, you would find that a majority were NFC players because scoring matters, especially at those high levels where players are playing every day and they're reaping the benefits of that slightly added scoring potential in any single game. And then in 2023, when it went back to the NFC, after the AFC had their 9 games of home enjoyment, in 2023, the AFC averaged 21.3 points per game, and the NFC averaged 22.3. So an extra point advantage. Now I've got a spreadsheet that has offensive yards, offensive points, and offensive TDs as a subset of offensive points going back to 2003. So those 3 categories going back to 2003 for every single team. And in every single year, a majority of NFL teams scored more points at home than they did on the road. That's a majority of teams did that every single year. Often a supermajority, at least 2/3. That happened frequently. Same thing is true for offensive TDs, which of course, like I said, a subset of points, but it still matters because touchdowns are so important for fantasy. Such an impact. I talked about it on my blog post yesterday. And in every single case since 2003, every single year, a majority of teams had more offensive TDs at home than on the road. As far as offensive yards, a majority had more offensive yards at home versus on the road in all but 2 seasons since 2003. That was the one exception, but it was only 2 exceptions. In every other case, a majority, often a very high majority of teams. So what does this mean heading into 2025? Well, the AFC has an extra home game this year. So we might find, if the data holds, that you will, if there's a tiebreaker as you're drafting between 2 players of equal value, and one is in the AFC and the other is in the NFC, all other things being equal, the AFC should have an advantage. In some cases, they might have an extraordinary advantage. And what I mean by that is if you play in a league where week 18 doesn't matter, if you're just focused on weeks 1 through 17, the fantasy title takes place week 17. There are some AFC teams that will play 9 of their 16 games, because they'll have a bye week, through week 17. 9 of those 16 games will be at home. In some cases, the Chargers are a good example. If you draft some Chargers, you're getting home games 9 out of 16 times through week 17. That's pretty good, all things considered. There's several AFC teams like that. So it's a small advantage. It might not mean a lot on a per player basis, but on an NFL wide basis, there is real evidence that home field advantage matters for offensive yards, offensive points, and specifically offensive touchdowns. And that is why we play this game, to try to figure out how do we get a little bit better with every data point, every hypothesis. Again, I'm BJ Riddell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog. See you tomorrow.